Welcome to Hard Talk with me, Zainab Badawi. Many of us are familiar with cases involving terminally ill patients who believe they should have the right to die at a time of their choosing. But what about making this a right for everyone, even if they are fit and healthy? Well, my guest today is the controversial Australian doctor Philip Nitschke, who believes anyone over 50 should be able to plan for the end of their life and be shown how to kill themselves in a way that is reliable and peaceful. Is he not just encouraging acts of suicide? Dr. Philip Nitschke, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you very much.
Now, you say this: I believe it is a fundamental human right for every adult of sound mind to be able to plan for the end of their life in a way that is reliable, peaceful and at a time of their choosing. Why do you believe this is a fundamental human right?
Well, I don't think we can simply say that, because we can't really try and make conditions and restrictions for people to be able to take this choice. I think that if we're going to be accepting the fact that life is a gift, and most of us accept the fact it's a precious gift, what sort of a gift is it if you're told that you can't give it away? That's not a gift, that's a burden, that's a ball and chain. And I think that what we have to be, if we really accept the fact, the autonomy of the individual, accept the fact that life is a gift, but also acknowledge that some people, for reasons that sometimes we don't understand, but they themselves make that decision that now's the time to go.
A fundamental human right, in the way that it's a human right to have basic shelter, food, yes, education. You would put the right to kill yourself on a par with that? Yes. You want to see it incorporated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for instance?
It should be. If we're going to acknowledge the right to life, we've got to acknowledge the right to be able to dispose of that gift, and that's the right to death.
So you really want to see that embodied as a universal human right, the right to kill yourself?
Yes, I would like to see that. I'm not going to be foolish enough to think that's going to happen in a hurry, but I want to see an acknowledgement of this, to move away from that idea that currently the debate revolves around whether or not terminally ill people should be able to get assistance to die. And I've been involved in that debate for a long time, and it isn't broad enough. It needs to be widened out, and we need to understand the philosophical underpinnings of that debate.
You believe, though, it's not just terminally ill people who should have a right to kill themselves.
That's right. I believe it should be up to any person who can rationally assess this issue.
So how would you talk about the fact, where you just mentioned now, that there's public discomfort, as it were, about the concept of rational suicide.
Yes, there is.
How do you define rational suicide?
A person who is able to make the decision, understand the implications, and take that decision that now's the time to end their life. In other words, they've got the ability, they've got capacity to make decisions in what they believe is their best interest. We're not talking about psychiatrically unwell people who have lost capacity. On the other hand, just having the presence of a psychiatric illness doesn't necessarily exclude you from the ability to make a decision as rational about ending your life.
Okay, you're licensed to practice medicine. You're a hospital doctor.
Yes.
You worked as a hospital doctor in sort of general medicine until 1996. But your licence to practice medicine was suspended in July 2014 in Australia.
Yes.
After you were found to pose a serious risk to the public's health and safety because of the beliefs you've just outlined
yes.
here. The Medical Board of Australia said that. Now, you said you were being hounded,
yes.
that you were being made a scapegoat.
I think, look, medical profession has a great deal of difficulty with accepting the fact that in some ways the world is changing. They are having enough trouble, and by they I'm talking in a rather general way about the profession, are having enough trouble to even accept the concept of straightforward legislation that would allow a terminally ill person to get help to die. The models we see increasingly around the world, the model that will be debated in Britain soon, where a person who's terminally ill, seen by a doctor, usually
sure, you've made that point, but you're going beyond that, as I said.
Because that's not big enough, it's not broad enough. And I, in the last few years that I've been involved in this issue, and have increasingly seen people come to me and talk about this issue, realise that we can't restrict it to that group. I don't want to restrict it to that group. I want to see it made clear that people should have the ability to take this choice no matter what their reason is.
Right. In 2013, Nigel Brayley, a 45-year-old Australian man, killed himself.
That's
had
true.
counselling with you.
Well, counselling's a strong.
All right, not counselling, but you met him.
I talked to him.
You talked to him.
Yeah.
And this is why your licence has been suspended,
Yes.
pending investigations into that. You said his death could be considered rational suicide in response to his fear of being investigated as a suspect in a double murder.
That's true.
So just explain that. You think it was rational for that reason? He wanted to avoid justice, or what?
Going back over it, I didn't know at the time this was the situation. And when I met Nigel briefly, a short chat at a gathering, one of our workshops we run around the world, he was slightly younger than the usual age. We usually restrict access to these workshops to 50. He was 45. And I thought, and I talked to people that are a bit younger, and he made sense. What he said to me made eminent sense. And I said, well, you can sit in and learn about these issues.
I should just say, you run workshops through your organisation,
Yes,
Exit International, around the world.
Yes.
People who are minded to take their own life or want to talk about
I want
it
to
can
learn
join
about
these
the
groups.
issue. Yes.
OK, so Nigel Brayley, 45 years of age. You accepted him into your group,
That's
even
true.
though he was under 50.
There were 300 people at that meeting, by the way. It's a big group, and he was one of the 300. And he sat there through it, and that was my first meeting with Nigel. I had a brief meeting, a subsequent political rally where I was standing as a candidate. And then I had a couple of emails from him. And the second email, I think it might have been the first or second, he announced to me by email that he was planning to take his life, end his life. So I didn't understand the reasons behind it, but
Yet you deemed them rational.
But
So
I had
here you are
nothing to
saying you
suggest.
only spoke to him briefly,
That's
you
right.
didn't really know a great deal about him, he didn't meet really the qualifying age of 50 plus, but never mind all that.
Well, what
he
do you-
talked to you and you decided that his actions were rational.
Well, there was nothing about him to suggest other than that. Now, if you're going to try
But you
and
didn't know him well enough.
But you're going to put the proposition that anyone who comes along and says they're going to end their life cannot be rational, you'll get a lot of support from the medical profession. But I'm saying that that's an incorrect assumption. Now, there was nothing about Nigel's behaviour to alarm me. Nothing to alert me. Everything he said was rational and consistent with the backwards and forwardsing. And by backwards and forwardsing, there were 2 or 3 emails. Very little, but enough for me to think this is a person who knows what he's doing.
But
now,
you see, you've just brought up the assisted suicide bill, dying bill here in the UK, which has been debated, and that's very clear.
Yes.
That says somebody should be allowed, and it's not British law at all, it's going through Parliament, being discussed. 2 doctors have to deem whether this person is compos mentis, is able to take this rational decision to end his or her life because they are terminally ill. So it's a very, very different kettle of fish from what you're saying.
Kettle of fish.
Yeah, but, you know, and I think that's what puzzles people, Dr. Nitschke. I mean...
I can explain it.
What you're explaining, I mean, if, for instance, you say Nigel offered to share his suicide note with you, did you not say you'd like a copy of it?
Yes, I did. He said to me, I'll send you a copy of my suicide note, and I said, yes, well, please do. I mean, I could have written back and said, no, keep it, I don't want it. But it seemed to me a reasonable thing to say to him in the context of what he had been describing. Later, we found out that he was being investigated for a double murder, and I think that put it back into context, because I was a little mystified about why this seemingly in-control person had made such a momentous decision as to end his life. But I guess if you were looking at 20 or 30 years in a prison in one of the tougher states of Australia, you might take that choice too.
But that just sounds like you're suggesting to anybody who might be investigated for a serious crime.
No, I investigated.
You know what?
There was a fair amount of evidence. This was not just going to be an investigation, this was going to be a prosecution.
Are you advocating then that that is a reasonable path for somebody, wherever they are, to go and kill themselves?
But that's a good example of rational suicide. People say, what do you mean rational suicide? They can understand it if you're about to drop dead of your lung cancer. But what other reasons, what are the non-medical reasons why a person might want to take this step? Well, there's one.
Evade justice, though? You wouldn't think it's quite good to...
What's justice?
Well, victims
Are we
might want to see
supposed to torture Nigel? I mean, the question is, he might decide, OK, the choice is 20 years in prison or death, and I choose death.
Well, you said in an interview with ABC News in 2011 that you love getting involved in an issue and making changes.
Yes.
Dr. Nitschke, why this particular change?
Well, it happened around me. I mean, I didn't actually pick this issue. It just happened when I was where the first law in the world for voluntary euthanasia was implemented, and I became the first, if you like, doctor in the world to administer a legal, lethal, voluntary injection.
That was in 1995, 96,
yes.
And it was a law that was only in place for 8 months.
4 of my patients.
And 4 of your patients, and you administered, 4 of your terminally ill patients,
Yes,
I should say, then
that's right.
did die. What does it feel like as a doctor to stop someone's life?
It's not easy. I mean, to try and make it easier for myself, I built a machine so that they could press the button on the machine so that I didn't actually sit there and have them, in a sense, dying on the end of my syringe. So I made up the machine, but I was worried, being asked to come around for lunch, and this is what happened with the case of Bob Dent, September the 22nd. Come around for lunch on Sunday, said Judy, his wife, and Bob said, I'll die at 2. That's hard, because going to someone's place knowing that when you leave an hour or 2 later they're going to be dead, a person you've got to know and like a lot, it's hard. And I couldn't sleep. I was worried. I checked and rechecked the machine. It wasn't the finest piece of engineering. I mean, I built it. I knew that things could go wrong, and that was a very tough meal.
You say it happened to you, but you know, you are a doctor. There are endless number of causes you could have advocated.
That's true.
So I'm still wondering, is there anything in your background, in your childhood or whatever, that would have made you choose, all right, whatever. Is there anything that would have made you choose this cause above all others?
I have had other courses. In fact, some people say I've had too many courses. I mean, this one was one that I think definitely needed change. And I must say, when our law came in Australia, I thought, won't be very long and everywhere in Australia will have decent legislation, very similar to the Falconer Bill here in the United Kingdom. Here we are 20 years later. There's not a single place in Australia where it's legal anymore. And in Britain, you're still debating it.
This is the assisted dying bill. Charles Faulkner brought it in.
But some countries are moving on. The world is changing slowly.
All right, but now, you know, I've put this to you, argument you've heard before. Dame Cicely Saunders, founder of the modern hospice movement, says you matter because you are you. You matter to the last moment of your life, and we will do all we can to help you die peacefully, but also to live until you die. Don't you believe in the sanctity of life?
We will do anything but listen to you. That's what Dame Cicely is saying here. We will do everything for you but take notice of what you want. And if you say to them, or her, I really want to die, she would turn away and walk away from you. So that's not taking all notice.
All right, you wrote a book in 2007 with your wife, Fiona Stewart, who's a sociologist, who also has the same views as you do, obviously, and believes that, you know, it's your body and you have a right to do what you want with it. And it suggests that the best way to kill yourself is to use a pill, which I can't give its name. It's only legal in a few countries. Why did you feel that you wanted to tell people how they could kill themselves in a peaceful way?
A lot of people will take the step of ending their life. Suicide is an issue and some see it as a serious problem. And if they don't have access to the best information, they'll do it in whatever way they can. Now, currently, given the official process, the official way of dealing with this issue is to make sure people don't learn anything. So you just don't know how to do it. The feeling is if you don't know how to do it, you won't do it. And so everyone would just live and get older and look at the wall and feel happy. But those people who decide to take that step and end their life can't get access to good information, leave alone the drugs they might need, and they become desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. And that leads to this damning British statistic that the commonest way people kill themselves in Britain is by hanging.
But I have to say that there was one case last year of a young Australian man, Joe Waterman.
Yes, I know Joe Waterman.
25 years of age. Bought an e-copy of your book.
That's true.
Stating falsely he was over 55 and that he was not mentally ill. And he killed himself taking this peaceful pill, as you call your book. His mother, Mary Waterman, says we could have had a chance to help. If this peaceful method wasn't so readily available, we might have seen it coming. I'd hate to think of him hanging himself, but I do not know if he would have done it in a violent way. That is the point. By showing how you can kill yourself peacefully, it encourages those who might otherwise be deterred.
I dispute that. I'm not too sure it encourages people. What it does is give them, I suppose, a range of options. So we don't know whether Joe would have hung himself or not.
That's it, that's the point.
We don't know. But the point I'm getting at here is, why are we simply saying that we should be restricting this access to information? Because this is an argument for censorship. We're saying, well, you can have it, I've got the information.
Because the violent methods that people might use,
Yes.
as you say, hanging, may act as a deterrent.
A deterrent. You feel that as soon as you start making it look like it's too peaceful, there'll be a flood of people wanting to take this peaceful choice.
Well, this is one tragic young man who clearly, his mother is implying, did that.
But it's not clear that the reason he took this step is because he said, oh, well, I've decided not to hang myself because that's grim, but I'm going to take this step because it's access to a peaceful drug. That's not at all clear. And I just don't think there's any, you can have substance to this argument that you can dole out this information about access to drugs that do work to the people that we deem to be knowledgeable or sensible enough to use it in the right way. Of course, you publish this information, and it goes out everywhere, and it's a good thing because that's a better society when people have access to information. Then they can make valid choices.
A few years ago in an interview, you used the term collateral damage.
Yes, it was a bad choice.
When talking about young people accessing
I won't
the
use
book.
the term again. But the point I'm trying to make...
You regret that.
I regret the term, but
the thought.
I don't regret the concept behind it, because what I'm saying here is that if we have the occasional very unfortunate casualty, a person who accesses information and uses it inappropriately, but that needs to be balanced with this whole large number of elderly folk who, desperate for this information, get access to the drugs, put them safely away, hope they'll never need it, and feel better. So you've got to trade that side of society off with the, for want of a better term, collateral damage of Joe.
But should you not consider the impact of actions such as the ones, Joe Waterman or people who kill themselves, on families you leave behind? I mean, I know you are happily married, you don't have children.
I do.
With Fiona Stewart,
no, I don't.
Your wife. You're a close couple. Obviously, we all have people we love, but should you not consider the impact on those left behind?
There's a couple of answers to that. Look, obviously, it's a tragic situation, and your heart can only go out to those families. But again, I need to stress, this is not a teenager. We're talking about an adult here. Now, people have to also take responsibility from within the family. They can't just, as people do, lash out at me because I'm the messenger that gave the information out there and let
No, I'm just asking if you think about the family, the feelings of the families left behind. Do you think about that?
I do think about it, but the second point is, because that could happen, and in this case it did happen, is that a reason for disenfranchising the vast number of other people who are desperate for and whose health improves when they get access to this information? Because empowering people means that they stop worrying, and when they stop worrying, I would argue they live longer. Paradox perhaps, but giving this information out is healthy.
But you're very confident about what you say. If I tell you what Western Australia's Mental Health Commissioner Tim Marnie says, he says he has had personal experience of how many people who survive after trying to take their own life are glad they did not die. So you're giving a fail-proof method. There's no going back, and yet, he's saying, look, there are people who say, thank goodness that didn't work.
Yeah, but again, that's the same argument, because if we're really effectively saying here that because someone might have changed their mind and now they can't because they're dead, therefore no one should ever have access to this information, it leads us down a dead-end street, and that's where our society is going. We're not giving out the information. We've got damning statistics out there about people ending their lives in graphic and unpleasant ways, and we're at the same time trying to argue that we've got a healthier society. Well, we haven't. You've been dubbed Dr. Death. Yes. Clearly a term that doesn't worry you, because you are going to be used to it. You're used to it. I think it was the Australian media that first coined it about you. Okay, and you are appearing in a comedy show at the Edinburgh Arts Festival later this year in Scotland with a terminally ill comedienne Mel Moon, and it's called Mel Moon Dicing with Dr. Death. Yes. You don't mind this notoriety? You can find comic things to say about so serious a topic? I think it's an important thing to use comedy in this way, because I think it's a medium which hasn't been explored in terms of getting this sort of broader message out to a somewhat different demographic. I think we're going to see in Edinburgh than the groups I normally talk to, and we do find there's a lot of amusing things that are happening around and within this issue, and I don't think it's going to be a very good show, and I hope people come along and reflect upon these issues, and if that's the price you've got to pay by being called or being one of the 9 Wikipedia doctor deaths, I guess I can live with it.
And now, you have been questioned when you arrived here in the UK by the Crown Prosecution Service, the CPS, following complaints about the kind of activities that we've been discussing that you take out. You've been questioned, you are still being questioned. Any idea what's going to happen to you? Might you face arrest? Might you be deported? Do you know?
The lawyers suggested that it was a good idea to go and have the interview. This is an interview under caution, because if you say, I don't want to have an interview, you do risk arrest. So we've answered all of the questions and I hope addressed all of their concerns. Of course, it is over the fact that I've run workshops in the United Kingdom and will, I hope, in the future, and also the content of the material that's going out in Edinburgh show. I've invited the Metropolitan Police to come along to Edinburgh and have a look. I think it'll be fine. I'm not being too blasé about this. I don't want those sort of adverse consequences, but I think we've done what's required, and I hope they'll see that this is not a case of giving out information equals assisting a suicide.
But so, you know, here you are being questioned, as I said, you know, by the CPS, and I put this point to you that psychiatrist Dr. Chris Ryan from University of Sydney made, and he supports dying with dignity, actually.
To a point.
Yeah, up to a point, different in some ways from you, but what he says is, look, Dr. Nitschke seems to just go around the law, and I think does harm rather than good to the euthanasia cause. I mean, do you think that perhaps your activities and the fact that, you know, you are being investigated and so on and so forth
does harm to the cause? Look, if your goal in life is to bring in a piece of conservative legislation like Charlie Falconer's into Britain, people that are working towards that, these groups supportive of voluntary euthanasia, see me as doing some damage to the cause, because I think that if you start broadening this out and talking about universal access to these drugs, what you're going to do is frighten the horses. The politicians will run for cover. They're not known for their courage. And on this issue, the legislative goal will disappear and evaporate. And so they see me as an enemy. I've got a lot of trouble, in a sense.
But do you have sympathy with their argument?
Sympathy because, I mean, I think legislation is important, and I want a bill to pass here in my country and in yours, a piece of legislation to pass. But I don't think that should, in a sense, silence the much broader issue.
But you're advocating the use of this drug, which is illegal in many countries.
It is now. Well, in some countries it's illegal, not in all countries.
Yeah, but in many countries it's illegal.
So people can go to these countries and make use of the benefits that that drug confers.
But in your book you actually show them how to, tell them how to acquire.
Well, yes, of course, it's got to be practical.
Yeah.
I mean,
and that's what they mean, perhaps, by, you know, you go around the law, and that does more harm than good.
It's not. Look, going to Peru is not going around the law. There's nothing illegal about going to Peru and acquiring the drug lawfully and taking it in a Peruvian hotel room. There's no crime in suicide in Peru or here, for that matter. But there's no illegal importation of banned substances.
I'll be personal with you here.
Okay.
In 2011, when you were asked about people helping family members die, you said, I hope I can say that if I find myself in that situation, that I would show the same courage. If, you said, so if you found yourself in a situation, or your wife, or whatever, would you want to help the other to die, or say, look, we think this is the right thing, and you would do it? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I've got the situation with my mother now, who every time I see her asks me whether or not I can hurry up and get her the drugs. And that's a difficult...
What's the matter with her?
Well, she's, like a lot of people, she's 95 years old and in a nursing home and not dying. She wants to, but she can't because she's too healthy.
And she lives in Australia, where euthanasia is
illegal, and it would never be legal for people like that.
So you're going to take your mother to Peru, for instance?
We have talked about going to Zurich, where such a choice would be an option. And I mean, she's a person who's effectively saying, look, I want access to that information. I'm somewhat paralysed because I'm probably too frightened in the situation of the spotlight that her situation attracts. But the idea of elderly people being able to take this choice and feeling comforted, and I know she'd be comforted if she had a little bottle of that drug in the cupboard. She would hope she never needed it, but by hell she'd feel a lot better than this anxiety that she finds herself living under now.
Dr. Philip Nitschke, thank you very much indeed for coming on Hard Talk. Thank you.